From Vermont Public, this is The Frequency. I'm Abigail Giles. It's Friday, June 6th. Here are today's headlines. A bipartisan coalition of lawmakers have sent so-called kids' code legislation to Governor Phil Scott's desk. The bill would require technology companies to adjust certain product safety features for users under 18. Scott vetoed a similar bill last year, citing a court decision that had struck down a California law that Vermont's effort is partly modeled upon. Lobbyists for tech companies have warned Vermont's latest effort would meet the same fate if signed into law, but champions of the data privacy legislation, like Democratic Representative Monique Priestley, say they've learned from California's mistakes.
Very much tracked every case that happened against all of the age-appropriate design codes in the country to make adjustments to really have a strong bill that can face in court. Ran it by a lot of First Amendment lawyers.
Scott hasn't yet said whether he'll sign this year's version of the legislation, but he's indicated he might. West Windsor will now fine drivers who hit the town's covered bridges, and they'll have to pay for bridge repairs. That's because of a new ordinance the Select Board adopted last week that's effective immediately. Select Board Chair Mark Higgins says the town foreman proposed the rule after delivery trucks hit one of the town's covered bridges 2 years in a row.
I'm sure you'll be shocked to learn that repairing covered bridges in this day and age is not a cheap exercise. We don't have a huge budget here, and so every dollar counts.
Higgins says the damage to the bridge was mostly cosmetic, but the town is worried a future accident could cause costly structural damage. Vermont is home to more than 100 covered bridges, and Higgins says local taxpayers shouldn't have to foot the bill alone for fixing them after an accident. An update to a recent story. We reported yesterday that Northland's Job Corps Center in Vergennes was expected to close due to an order from the U.S. Department of Labor. The department decided to, quote, pause the nationwide Job Corps program. On Wednesday evening, after we produced yesterday's episode of The Frequency, a New York federal judge granted an order that, for now, blocks the U.S. Department of Labor from shutting down the Job Corps program. The next court hearing in the case is scheduled for June 17th. And 10 years ago Thursday, 2 inmates escaped jail in the North Country, and it made national headlines. Convicted killers Richard Matt and David Sweat were discovered missing from Clinton Correctional Facility in Dannemora, New York, on June 6, 2015. Subsequently, a prison guard and prison seamstress were arrested for their roles in helping the prisoners escape. One inmate, Matt, was eventually shot and killed by New York authorities in late June. Sweat was shot and arrested days later. He's currently jailed at a different New York facility. The jailbreak caused tumult in the region, with schools and businesses closing during the 23 days the 2 escapees were on the run. Coming up, Vermont lawmakers are trying to control healthcare costs by capping how much hospitals can charge for specialty drugs. And we hear from Woodstock resident and comedian Vicki Ferentinos. Those stories are after this.
Thanks for listening to The Frequency, where support comes from VITA, supporting business growth and innovation in the Green Mountain State. From agriculture to manufacturing, energy to food production, find solutions that turn your business dreams into reality. Visit VEDA.org and see how VITA can help make it happen.
Healthcare costs in Vermont are out of control and continuing to rise. Lawmakers are taking a swing at lowering costs by capping how much hospitals in Vermont can charge for specialty drugs. Those are medications used to treat cancers and autoimmune conditions, administered at an office or infusion center. But the price cap takes away millions of dollars from hospitals. Morning Edition host Jen Jarecki spoke with reporter Lexi Krupp.
So first, tell us about drug markups at hospitals. Why is this something lawmakers wanted to target in the first place?
Outpatient drug prices in Vermont are super high, the highest in the country by a lot, about twice the national average. These are drugs you cannot pick up at a pharmacy. They're used to treat certain cancers or conditions like Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis. And there's some big outliers. Drugs being marked up 10, 20, or 70 times the manufacturer's price. And this is something insurance companies have specifically called out. Here's Sarah Teachout of Blue Cross Blue Shield of Vermont at the State House last month.
When we look at all the things contributing to high premiums, this is the standout reason.
So lawmakers heard about this problem and actually did something. They set a price cap on how much hospitals can charge for these drugs. Lexi, what did they ultimately decide on?
So the legislation applies to 8 Vermont hospitals. It excludes the state's smallest, most rural hospitals that are not affiliated with a bigger hospital system. And here are the numbers. It says hospitals cannot charge more than 120% of the manufacturer's average sales price, or ASP. This is a number calculated by the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, and it includes discounts that insurance companies get from drug manufacturers. Blue Cross has said this is going to save millions of dollars, and it would lower health insurance premiums, basically overnight. This would apply to teachers' health insurance plans and premiums on the state marketplace. Those would go down by 4 percentage points. So instead of, say, a 14% increase, it would actually be a 10% increase in premiums for next year.
So relief for everyone paying health insurance, which sounds great. But Lexi, is there opposition to the price cap?
Yeah, you can imagine hospitals are not thrilled. And the problem here is that some say this average sales price number doesn't actually reflect the cost of the drugs they buy. I spoke with Peter Wright, the CEO of Northwestern Medical Center in St. Albans, about this.
There's no argument that where we are today is unacceptable and unsustainable. I think everybody agrees with that. The point here is we're getting punished. Nobody in the country charges 120% of average sale price. Nobody.
Under this legislation, what would happen to a hospital like Northwestern?
So they run an infusion center right next to the emergency department and serves patients in Franklin and Grand Isle counties. They had about 2,500 appointments in the last year. And some of their most common drugs, like Inflectra, Remicade, Rituxan, they cost the hospital way more than the average sales price. So Northwestern is worried about being able to keep that infusion center open. Right now, it just about breaks even, and it's projected to lose somewhere between $2 to $2.5 million a year under this law. If they close, patients would have to travel for care, potentially out of state. Here's CEO Peter Wright again.
We'll have to send people to Plattsburgh, North Country Hospital in Newport, or Copley Hospital in Morrisville, depending upon where patients live.
And other hospitals are expected to lose a lot more money. Rutland Regional Medical Center could lose $16 million a year. UVM Health Network says across their hospitals, they could lose between $60 to $80 million a year.
How does the legislation guard against hospitals cutting services as a result of this cap?
There's a clause that basically says if a hospital thinks the price cap is going to limit patients' access to care or means they might have to close a service, they can request a rate increase, so getting more money from another service they provide. That's all determined by the Green Mountain Care Board, our state's healthcare regulator. But either way, hospitals will feel this. Jessica Holmes is a member of the board.
There is going to be a decline in revenues coming into the hospitals, right? The reality is that the only way to bring our health insurance costs back in line with the rest of the country is to reduce our healthcare spending.
Okay, Lexi, what happens next?
Governor Phil Scott has indicated he's supportive of the legislation. If he signs it into law, the price cap will go into effect at the start of next year.
Thanks so much for sharing your reporting, Lexi. Really appreciate it.
Always great to be here.
Woodstock resident Vicki Ferentinos is a polymath. The former art gallery owner and professional chef who used to run a cafe in town writes a regular column for the Vermont Standard. She's also a comedian. Ferentinos has performed with the New York City-based improv troupe Upright Citizens Brigade, been featured on Comedy Central, and this weekend she'll perform in the Funny with Pride comedy show in Woodstock. Vermont Public's Jen Jarecki recently sat down with Ferentinos and, shortly into their conversation, asked if the comedian had always incorporated queer themes into her act.
No, because I had no idea I was queer for the first 5 years of doing stand-up. I came out probably when I was like 36, and I started doing comedy at 32. And I won the Shop Award in high school, and I can blacksmith and weld. And I would tile the kitchen of every boyfriend's mom I ever dated. But anyway, still I was like, I'm not gay. I'm just the lady who can do all these things.
Talking about life with your wife is a big part of your routine.
It is. It is. I always spoke from the truth of what I was going through in life. So, yeah, my wife's a huge part of it. And it was funny. My mom would always say, like, I don't understand why comedians talk about this because that's so personal. But I was like, well, wait a second. Like, straight people talk about their significant other all the time, and that seems normal. So why wouldn't I talk about my wife?
Okay, so Woodstock Pride is in its second year. Were you involved last year?
I had thyroid cancer last year. I had my thyroid removed, and they're like, I don't know what you want to do. And I was like, I'm going to be fine by then. And I was. And I did the master's ceremony for the high heels race and saw people of Woodstock wear heels that they probably haven't worn in 20 years, which was fun. And then at night, we had done a show at the Grange Theater in Pomfret. And this year, I was like, why don't we up it? And Pentangle had just redone their theater, and so it's like a bigger theater, so we're hoping we'll sell out there too, and we have fun comics coming.
Well, and I want to ask you about that. When I saw that Woodstock Pride was having a comedy show, my first thought was a little contrarian. In February, President Trump issued an executive order claiming there are only two genders, male and female. And local organizations that support LGBTQ plus Vermonters have seen steep funding decreases, throwing their ability to deliver services into question. And so I got to ask you, Vicki, what is there to laugh about right now?
This is the best time to create great art and great comedy and make people laugh. You can't change darkness with darkness. You got to keep it light. You got to keep it moving, make them smile, laugh, think, plant a seed in their head and change something. And I don't think you're going to do it by just giving the same angst back. And hopefully, even if naive as it may be, hopefully that'll start changing things the other way. Because if you think about it, it took one guy to ride an escalator, repeat words over and over and over again to create this, or at least shine a light on it. Why can't it be the opposite be true?
What does Pride Month signify? And more personally, like, what does it mean to you?
I always had gay friends. I always all that. Like, I was always in gay culture because I'm a gay person, but I didn't realize that. And I think once you kind of open your brain up and you like realize things about yourself and your world becomes more colorful and you're like, oh, you have this literally sense of pride during Pride Month because you realize how important representation matters. And like, I performed at the Stonewall many times, so I'm very aware that there's been so many other people before me who've had it rougher, and I realize that you have to keep up the fight going, and I think pride is a very important thing just so people remember to remember.
That was comedian Vicki Ferentinos speaking with Vermont Public's Jen Chirecki. Thanks for listening to The Frequency today. We had additional reporting from Lola DeFore and Mary Angish. Today's episode was edited by Liam Elder Connors and produced by Adia Ghostin. And our music is by Blue Dot Sessions. I'm Abigail Giles. Talk to you soon.
Planet Money helps you understand the economy. We find the people at the center of the story.
Garbage in New York, that was like a controlled substance.
We show you how money influences everything.
Tell me what you like by telling me how you spend your money.
And we dig until we get answers.
I had a bad feeling you're going to bring that up.
Planet Money finds out. All you have to do is listen. The Planet Money Podcast from NPR.